Welcome back to Who Shot JFK. We get a lot of requests to tackle, various JFK assassination theories, but this one is particularly intriguing. Today's deep dive is all about Harvey and Lee by John Armstrong, a book you specifically asked us to unpack. It delves into the possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the lone gunman history remembers, and that there might have been another Oswald involved, a Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, this book throws a real curveball into the whole JFK assassination narrative. I mean, Armstrong's core premise is audacious, to say the least, that there were two individuals, both named Oswald, operating in parallel leading up to November 22nd, 1963.
All right, before we get lost in the JFK conspiracy rabbit hole, let's lay some groundwork. For those unfamiliar, the lone gunman theory posits that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy. The Warren Commission, which was established to investigate the assassination, ultimately concluded that Oswald was solely responsible. But Armstrong's book challenges that very notion, right?
Yes, and he does this by meticulously dissecting the lives of both Lee and Harvey, beginning with their childhoods. Armstrong's book is structured like a double biography, highlighting discrepancies in their personalities, physical descriptions, and even their documented paths.
So we're talking about more than just a few differing accounts or fuzzy memories. Armstrong is pointing to a pattern of inconsistencies that suggest two distinct individuals. What kind of evidence does he use to support this two Oswalds claim?
He pulls from a variety of sources: school records, military documents, eyewitness accounts, even financial trails. It's like he's piecing together two separate puzzles that occasionally share a few pieces, but ultimately form entirely different pictures.
I'm particularly curious about the eyewitness accounts. What kind of discrepancies are we talking about?
Take, for instance, a story from Edward Vobel, a supposed classmate of Harvey Oswald. He vividly recounts Harvey getting into trouble for playing a piano without permission back in junior high. Now, this incident doesn't align at all with the personality commonly attributed to Lee Harvey Oswald, who, according to multiple sources, was more prone to fighting than tickling the ivories.
So right off the bat, we have a clash between the Harvey, described by Vobel, and the Lee, known to others. That's quite a contradiction.
Exactly, and these contradictions extend beyond personality quirks. Armstrong also delves into their documented paths. While Lee's military service is well documented, Harvey's trail leads to possible involvement in something far more shadowy: clandestine operations. During the Cold War, clandestine operations often involved espionage, sabotage, and even assassination attempts, all carried out in secrecy.
Hold on. Are we saying that while Lee Harvey Oswald was serving as a Marine, his alleged double Harvey was potentially being trained for covert missions? That's a pretty big leap.
It is, and Armstrong backs it up with specific examples. He analyzes discrepancies in their school records, particularly those from Beauregard Junior High, suggesting that two separate individuals were enrolled under the same name.
So we have conflicting accounts from people who knew them, and now we have official records suggesting two separate paths. It's like following two sets of footprints that only occasionally converge.
That's a great way to put it. And this is where things get even more complicated. Armstrong doesn't stop with just Lee and Harvey. He brings their mother, Marguerite Oswald, into the mix, proposing that even she might have been impersonated.
Wait, two Oswalds weren't enough? Now we have a potential double for Marguerite Oswald as well. This is getting wild.
It's a bold claim, no doubt. Armstrong highlights discrepancies in descriptions of Marguerite from those who knew her. Some describe her as tall and attractive, while others paint a picture of a shorter, stouter woman. Even her personality seems to shift, depending on who you ask.
Okay, but how could someone impersonate a mother? Wouldn't people close to her, her own family, be able to tell the difference?
Armstrong focuses on an incident where Marguerite allegedly suffered an injury and subsequently engaged in a legal battle. He digs into the specifics of this case, pointing to inconsistencies that cast doubt on her identity and motivations.
So now we have potential doubles for Lee Harvey Oswald and possibly even his mother. It's starting to feel like we're stepping into a hall of mirrors here.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Armstrong then dives into how Harvey was potentially groomed for a very specific role, a role that could have dire consequences.
Okay, I think we need to pause here and let our listeners process this. Two Oswalds, a potentially impersonated mother, and a mysterious role Harvey was being prepped for. It sounds like we're just getting started with this deep dive into Harvey and Lee, and trust me, it gets even more complicated.
Welcome back to Who Shot JFK. Before we delve deeper into Harvey and Lee, let's recap where we left off. We were discussing John Armstrong's intriguing theory that Lee Harvey Oswald might have had a double, potentially setting him up as a patsy in the JFK assassination. We talked about discrepancies in eyewitness accounts, official documents, and even the possibility that his mother, Marguerite, was also impersonated.
Right, and it's all starting to feel like a very elaborate puzzle with pieces that seem to fit together, but ultimately create a picture that challenges everything we thought we knew about the events leading up to November 22nd, 1963. So where do we go from here?
Well, Armstrong shifts his focus to how Harvey might have been groomed for a specific and potentially dangerous role. He suggests that Harvey was being prepared to be the fall guy, the patsy, in the assassination of President Kennedy.
That's a chilling thought. But what evidence does Armstrong present to support this claim?
He points to Harvey's alleged connections to intelligence agencies, specifically figures like Guy Bannister. Now, for those unfamiliar, Bannister was a former FBI agent turned private investigator with ties to anti-Castro groups in New Orleans. It was a hotbed of intrigue during the Cold War, a time when tensions between the U.S. and Cuba were reaching a boiling point.
So we're talking about a time of espionage, covert operations, and a lot of shadowy figures operating behind the scenes. How does Harvey fit into this picture?
Armstrong meticulously examines Harvey's alleged encounters and activities that suggest a connection to these clandestine networks. Imagine secret training exercises, covert meetings, and a gradual immersion into a world where deception and manipulation were the norm. This all stands in stark contrast to Lee's documented military service, which was far more straightforward.
It's like Lee was living a life in the open while Harvey was being pulled into a world of secrets and shadows. It makes you wonder if this alleged double life was intentionally orchestrated, almost like a puppet master pulling the strings.
And the divergence becomes even more striking when you consider their alleged travels. Armstrong claims that Harvey made trips to Cuba and Russia, which directly contradicts Lee's documented movements during his time in the Marines. Remember, this is the Cold War, and traveling to communist countries was highly suspicious, especially for someone like Oswald, who would later be accused of communist sympathies.
So while Lee is following orders and serving his country, Harvey is potentially being used to create a trail of incriminating evidence, a trail that would later be used to paint Oswald as a communist sympathizer and ultimately the lone gunman responsible for President Kennedy's assassination.
That's precisely the argument Armstrong is building. He suggests that someone or some organization was intentionally manipulating Harvey to create a narrative that would ultimately point to Lee as the assassin.
Okay, this is where my head starts to spin a bit. Two Oswalds with divergent paths, a mother who might also have been impersonated, and now a trail of seemingly manufactured evidence leading to Cuba and Russia. What happens next in Armstrong's investigation?
Armstrong then turns his attention to a crucial event that occurred just weeks before the assassination: Oswald's alleged trip to Mexico City. This is a key part of the official narrative because it's during this trip that Oswald allegedly visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies, seemingly solidifying his communist ties.
Right, and that visit plays a big role in the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone and was motivated by communist sympathies. But if we're to believe Armstrong, there's more to this story, right?
Absolutely. Armstrong meticulously analyzes the events surrounding this trip, pointing to inconsistencies and discrepancies that raise serious questions about what really happened in Mexico City. He brings up conflicting eyewitness accounts, missing photographic and audio evidence from CIA surveillance, and even the mysterious death of Winston Scott, the CIA chief of station in Mexico City at the time.
Hold on, the CIA chief of station in Mexico City died just days after the assassination.
Yeah.
And there was missing evidence. That's incredibly suspicious.
It is. And Armstrong uses these inconsistencies to suggest that someone might have been impersonating Oswald in Mexico City, intentionally leaving behind a trail of evidence designed to link him to pro-Castro groups and the Soviet Union.
Okay, now it feels like we're watching a spy thriller unfold. A potential double, leaving a trail of false evidence in a foreign country while the real Oswald is somewhere else entirely. This is getting more and more intriguing.
And this alleged manipulation in Mexico City, according to Armstrong, was a crucial step in setting the stage for the assassination and framing Lee as the lone gunman. He then moves on to examine the assassination itself, focusing on the events at the Texas School Book Depository and the rifle allegedly used to shoot President Kennedy.
This is where the two Oswalds theory really comes into play, doesn't it? Because if someone was impersonating Oswald in Mexico City, it's not a stretch to think that someone else might have fired the fatal shots.
Exactly. Armstrong analyzes the evidence surrounding the rifle, suggesting that Harvey, not Lee, might have been the one who purchased it. He ties this back to Harvey's alleged involvement with intelligence agencies and clandestine operations, proposing that the rifle was potentially provided through those channels.
So while Lee is being positioned as a patsy through manufactured evidence and carefully orchestrated movements, Harvey is potentially being used as the operational arm, the one carrying out the assassination itself.
That's the core of Armstrong's argument. He suggests that the entire assassination was a meticulously planned operation with Harvey playing the role of the assassin while Lee was being groomed as the fall guy.
And what about the shooting of Officer Tippit? That's another key event in the official timeline. Does Armstrong apply his two Oswalds theory to that incident as well?
He does. He dissects the eyewitness accounts of the Tippit shooting, pointing out discrepancies in the descriptions of the assailant that don't quite match up with Lee Harvey Oswald. He also highlights Oswald's alleged lack of motive for killing Tippit, further supporting the idea that he was being framed for a crime he didn't commit.
So it's not just that there might have been two Oswalds, it's that their actions were seemingly orchestrated to create a very specific narrative, a narrative that pointed to Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone gunman responsible for both the assassination of President Kennedy and the murder of Officer Tippit.
That's exactly what Armstrong argues. He suggests that Harvey was used to carry out actions that would be pinned on Lee, creating a trail of false leads and solidifying the case against him.
This is a lot to process. We have potential double-manipulated evidence and orchestrated actions, all designed to frame Lee Harvey Oswald. But where does Armstrong go from here?
Well, having established the possibility of two Oswalds and a meticulously constructed Patsy Armstrong turns his attention to a topic that is perhaps the most unsettling of all: the possibility of a cover-up.
Oh, wow. So it's not enough that there might have been two Oswalds involved in this elaborate scheme. Now we're delving into the possibility that powerful institutions might have been complicit in covering up the truth. This is getting really intense.
It is, and it's a topic we need to explore carefully and thoroughly. So when we return, we'll dive into Armstrong's investigation of this alleged cover-up, examining the evidence he presents and the conclusions he draws about who might have been involved and why.
Welcome back to Who Shot JFK. We've been unpacking John Armstrong's Harvey and Lee, a book that has taken us down a winding path of intrigue, discrepancies, and unsettling possibilities. We've discussed the two Oswalds theory, the potential for orchestrated actions to frame Lee Harvey Oswald, and now we're about to dive into the deepest, darkest part of this rabbit hole: the alleged cover-up.
Yeah, this is where things get really murky. Armstrong suggests that powerful institutions like the FBI, the CIA, and even the Warren Commission itself might have been involved in suppressing evidence, manipulating testimonies, and ultimately shaping a narrative that obscured the full truth about the JFK assassination.
Okay, let's back up a bit. We need to be careful here because we're talking about some serious allegations. What specific evidence does Armstrong present to support this claim of a cover-up?
He starts by pointing to inconsistencies in how evidence was handled. For instance, he discusses Oswald's W-2 forms from his time at the Pfister Dental Laboratory. These forms seem to have been altered to create the illusion that Oswald was working there in 1956 before he joined the Marines. However, Marine Corps records clearly show that Oswald was stationed in Japan during that time.
So we have official documents that appear to have been tampered with. Why would someone go through the trouble of manipulating these W-2 forms? What purpose would that serve?
Armstrong suggests that it was an attempt to muddy the waters, to make it more difficult to track Oswald's true movements and activities. Remember, this is well before the era of digital records and widespread surveillance. Physical documents were everything back then, and altering them could effectively erase someone's presence or create a false alibi.
It's like someone was trying to build a case against Oswald, even if it meant fabricating evidence. But it goes beyond just these W-2 forms, right? Armstrong points to other examples of evidence manipulation as well.
He does. He discusses missing files, discrepancies in witness testimonies, and even the suppression of key witnesses who might have contradicted the official narrative. He cites the disappearance of evidence from Winston Scott's safe, the CIA chief of station in Mexico City, who died under mysterious circumstances just days after the assassination. He also mentions Sylvia Duran, a Cuban consulate employee, who initially identified Oswald as the visitor but later recanted her statement after allegedly being subjected to intense pressure and possibly even torture.
Wow, it's unsettling to think that people might have been silenced or coerced into changing their stories to fit a predetermined narrative. This is starting to feel like a scene out of a political thriller. What does Armstrong say about the Warren Commission's role in all of this? They were supposed to be the impartial investigators, right?
Right, but Armstrong argues that the Warren Commission, which was tasked with investigating the assassination, might have been influenced or even controlled by individuals with a vested interest in maintaining the lone gunman narrative. He points to the involvement of figures like Alan Dulles, the former CIA director who was fired by President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and James Angleton, the CIA's counterintelligence chief, known for his deep distrust of the Soviet Union and his belief in widespread communist infiltration.
So you're saying that individuals with potentially strong biases and personal vendettas were in positions of power within the very investigation that was supposed to uncover the truth.
It certainly raises questions about the objectivity and thoroughness of the Warren Commission's investigation. Armstrong suggests that these individuals might have steered the commission away from certain lines of inquiry, suppressed evidence that contradicted the lone gunman theory, and ultimately shaped the final report to fit a predetermined narrative.
It's chilling to think that the report that for decades shaped public understanding of the JFK assassination might have been deliberately manipulated. But what would be the motive for such a cover-up? Why go to such lengths to protect the lone gunman narrative?
Armstrong explores several potential motives. He suggests that protecting sensitive intelligence operations, avoiding political fallout, and even preventing a wider war with the Soviet Union might have played a role. Remember, this was the height of the Cold War, and tensions were incredibly high. The assassination of a U.S. president by a supposed communist sympathizer could have easily escalated into a global conflict.
It makes you wonder if those in power might have seen a cover-up as a way to maintain stability, even if it meant sacrificing the truth. But amidst all this intrigue, does Armstrong offer any specific theories about who might have been behind this alleged conspiracy? Does he point to any individuals or organizations as the masterminds?
He does single out one individual in particular, David Atlee Phillips, a career CIA officer who played a key role in the agency's anti-Castro operations, including the Bay of Pigs invasion. Armstrong alleges that Phillips was the source of many fabricated stories and documents coming from the CIA's Mexico City station, intentionally creating a trail of false evidence linking Oswald to Cuba and communist groups.
So Phillips had the expertise in covert operations and the motive, given his involvement in the Bay of Pigs and his potential resentment towards Kennedy. But what about Jack Ruby? He shot Oswald before he could stand trial, silencing him forever. Does Armstrong shed any light on Ruby's role in all of this?
While Armstrong doesn't explicitly claim that Ruby was part of the conspiracy, he does present evidence suggesting that Ruby's actions might have been more than just a random act of violence by a distraught nightclub owner. He highlights Ruby's connections to organized crime, his trips to Cuba in the years leading up to the assassination, and his seemingly extensive knowledge of Oswald's movements and the police's plans for transferring him.
It makes you wonder if Ruby's actions, whether planned or opportunistic, served the interests of those involved in the alleged cover-up. By silencing Oswald, he ensured that the accused assassin would never get to tell his side of the story, potentially revealing information that could have unraveled the entire conspiracy.
That's a question that continues to haunt historians and researchers to this day. We may never know for sure what motivated Jack Ruby, but his actions certainly had a profound impact on the course of history.
This has been an incredibly deep dive into Harvey and Lee. We've explored a theory that challenges everything we thought we knew about the JFK assassination, from the identity of the assassin to the possibility of a cover-up involving powerful institutions. It's a lot to take in, and it leaves us with more questions than answers.
What's fascinating is that even if you don't fully buy into the two Oswalds theory, Armstrong's work forces you to confront the fragility of historical narratives. We often think of history as settled fact, but the JFK assassination shows how much interpretation, missing information, and potential manipulation can shape our understanding of the past.
So what you're saying is, this isn't just about Oswald, or even Kennedy anymore. It's about how we approach information and truth, especially when it comes to events that have been shrouded in mystery and controversy.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be skeptical, to question authority, and to seek out information from diverse sources. We live in an age of information overload, but that also means there's more potential than ever to uncover hidden truths.
That's actually quite empowering. Harvey and Lee has given us a lot to think about, but it's also provided us with the tools to be more informed and discerning consumers of information.
And that's really the value of a deep dive like this. It's not just about absorbing facts, it's about developing the critical thinking skills we need to navigate a world saturated with information, misinformation, and competing narratives.
So for those of you listening, what stands out to you? Does Armstrong's evidence convince you? Does it change how you view the JFK assassination or even history in general?
I'm curious to know what you think. Do you find Armstrong's theory compelling? What aspects of his research resonated with you the most? More importantly, how will you apply the critical thinking skills we've discussed to the information you encounter in your own life?
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to check out Harvey and Lee for yourself. And if you're feeling really adventurous, dive into some of the primary sources Armstrong cites, declassified government documents, witness testimonies, and alternative investigations into the assassination. This is just the beginning of a much larger exploration, and we're excited to see where it takes you. Thanks for joining us on Who Shot JFK, and remember, keep asking questions, keep seeking the truth, and never stop digging.